Check your background. I repeat, blue on blue.
They have us bracketed. 2 o'clock high.
Viper 2 is down. We need air, now.
Miller. Wind is full value, left to right. 700 meters.
Smith, get your head down. That is a direct order.
You are a cook.
I have the solution.
Target down. Adjusting for second target.
Check your background. I repeat, blue on blue, check your background. The radio static hissed, cutting through the ringing in Emily's ears. Dust coated her tongue, tasting of copper and burnt propellant. They have us bracketed, Miller. 2 o'clock high. The ridge. I can't see them. Miller's voice was a ragged bark, stripped of its usual command. Viper 2 is down. The rifle is gone. We are combat ineffective. We need air now. Negative on air, Papa 1. Cloud ceiling is on the deck. You are on your own. Silence stretched for 3 seconds. An eternity in a kill zone. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. Not a scream, not an explosion. A rhythmic, controlled breathing over the open comms channel. Miller, a female voice whispered. Calm, terrifyingly calm. Wind is full value, left to right, 700 meters. Smith? Get your head down. Stay in the truck. I have the solution. Don't move. Smith, that is a direct order. Do not engage. You are a cook, for God's sake. Crack thump. The distinct, heavy recoil of a .300 Winchester Magnum tore through the air, silencing the machine gun on the ridge. Target down, she whispered, adjusting for second target. Don't thank me yet. 12 hours earlier, FOB Keystone, Hindu Kush border region. The kitchen at Forward Operating Base Keystone didn't smell like war. It smelled of rehydrated eggs, industrial disinfectant, and the lingering metallic scent of frozen beef thawing in aluminum sinks. Petty Officer Second Class Emily Smith chopped onions with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Chop, slide, chop, slide. Her knife work was precise, the blade flashing under the flickering fluorescent lights of the galley container. To the Navy, she was a CS2, a culinary specialist. To the men stationed at this rock-strewn purgatory in the Hindu Kush, she was simply Smith, or more often, the lunch lady. The serving hatch slammed open, rattling the frame. Tell me you're not serving that gray slop again, Smith. Emily didn't look up immediately. She finished the onion, wiped the blade on her apron, and turned. Master Chief Miller stood at the window, his face caked in the dust of the valley, his plate carrier still strapped to his chest. He looked like a man who had been chewing on gravel for 3 days. It's beef stroganoff, Master Chief, Emily said, her voice neutral, or the Navy's approximation of it. I have men who just humped 40 clicks of bad terrain, Miller grunted, leaning into the hatch. His blue eyes were piercing, scanning the kitchen as if searching for insurgents behind the flour sacks. They need protein, real protein, not this paste. Inventory is down to 30%, Emily replied, reaching for a ladle. Supply convoy got delayed by weather in Bagram. Again. She dropped a heavy dollop of the gray mixture onto his metal tray. Unless you want to go out there and hunt a mountain goat, this is what's on the menu. Miller stared at the food, then at her. The disdain was subtle, but it was there. It was the look of a predator assessing a herbivore. To him, she was baggage, a logistical requirement that consumed oxygen and water, but contributed nothing to the kinetic fight. Just fill the hole, Smith, Miller muttered, grabbing the tray. Try not to burn the water next time. He turned and walked away toward the tables where his team, Team 4, sat cleaning their weapons. They laughed as he approached, likely at her expense. Emily watched him go. Her eyes drifted past him through the reinforced plexiglass window that looked out over the valley. The wind was picking up. She could see the communication antenna on the command post swaying. 3 to 5 miles per hour, full value from the west, she noted automatically. Distance to the ridgeline, 1,200 meters. Elevation adjustment required. Considerable. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. That part of her life was redacted, buried under a medical waiver for a shoulder injury that had healed years ago, and a psychological evaluation that labeled her too detached. The Navy needed cooks, they said. So she cooked. Smith! The shout came from the rear entrance. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, the base XO, ducked inside. He looked flustered, holding a clipboard like a shield. "Sir?" Emily snapped to attention, though her hands were still covered in onion juice. "Change of plans," Holloway said, breathless. "The supply convoy from Bagram is canceled indefinitely. Landslides. Then we're on MREs by Tuesday, sir." "Not if we can help it. Intel says there's a village in the green zone, about 20 clicks north. Locals are friendly-ish. They have livestock and produce. Miller's team is heading out for a presence patrol and a meet and greet with the elders." Emily felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She knew where this was going. "You want me to go shopping, sir?" "I want you to handle the procurement," Holloway corrected. "You know the budget. You know what is safe to eat. Miller's guys don't know a turnip from a tuber." "Master Chief Miller isn't going to like having a non-combatant in his stack, sir." "Master Chief Miller follows orders," Holloway said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Gear up, Smith. Full kit. You leave an hour." Emily nodded. "Aye, sir." As Holloway left, Emily untied her apron. She walked to her locker at the back of the galley. Inside, hidden behind a stack of sterile cookbooks, was a small, waterproof notebook. She pulled it out, thumbing through the pages filled with ballistics data, dope cards, and hand-drawn range maps. She wasn't just a cook, but out there, outside the wire, being a cook was a death sentence if you didn't know how to be something else. She closed the locker. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the empty kitchen. The interior of the up-armored Humvee smelled of stale sweat, CLP gun oil, and the sharp, acidic tang of chew tobacco. It was a sensory assault that CS2 Emily Smith was not accustomed to, at least not in this concentration. She was wedged into the rear passenger seat behind the driver, her knees knocking against the transmission tunnel. Her body armor, a standard-issue plate carrier that felt 2 sizes too big, dug into her hips. In her hands, she held an M4 carbine that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of the armory rack, scratched, rattled, and iron-sighted. "Keep the muzzle down, Smith," Master Chief Miller's voice crackled through the internal comms headset. He was sitting in the front passenger seat, the vehicle commander's spot, watching the road ahead through ballistic glass. "And for Christ's sake, don't fiddle with the safety." "I know how to carry a weapon, Master Chief," Emily replied, her voice tight. Knowing how to carry it on a parade deck and knowing how to carry it in a box rolling through Indian country are 2 different things. Miller shot back, not turning around. "Just sit there. Watch your sector. If you see something, call it out. Actually, if you see something, tell Jenkins next to you and let him call it out. I don't want you clogging the net." Beside her, Jenkins, a burly first class with a heavy machine gunner's build, offered a sympathetic but dismissive smirk. He adjusted his own weapon, a MK-48 machine gun, with the casual familiarity of a man handling a guitar. "Don't sweat it, Cookie," Jenkins mumbled off comms. "Just a milk run. We buy some goats, we drive back. Easy day." The convoy, consisting of 3 vehicles, rumbled out of the main gate of Fob Keystone and onto the hard-packed dirt road. The suspension groaned as they hit the first rut. Emily stared out the thick, tinted window. The world outside was a monochrome painting of beige and gray. The Hindu Kush Mountains rose like jagged teeth on either side of the valley, their peaks shrouded in low-hanging clouds. To the SEALs, this was a transit zone. To Emily, it was a geometry problem. As they picked up speed, her eyes didn't lazily scan the horizon like a passenger. They snapped from point to point, dissecting the terrain. Ridgeline 600 meters, elevation advantage. Defilade position behind that rock cluster. Wind blowing south to north, kicking up dust spirals. Her mind began overlaying a grid on the landscape. It was an involuntary reflex, a ghost from her past life before the Navy rebranded her. "Control, this is Viper 1, Miller radioed to the TOC. "Passing phase line Alpha, all green. Copy, Viper 1. Proceed to objective gold. Current ROE is restrictive. Do not engage unless PID is confirmed and you are taking effective fire. Over." "Solid copy." The road narrowed as they pushed deeper into the sector. The vast open valley began to constrict, the canyon walls creeping closer until they blocked out the morning sun. The shadows lengthened, stretching across the road like black fingers. Emily shifted in her seat, a prickle of unease running down her spine. She leaned forward, trying to get a better look at the map display mounted on the dashboard between Miller and the driver. "Master Chief," she said, hesitating only a fraction of a second. "What?" Miller snapped. "The map shows this route as a gradual incline with open sight lines for 2 clicks. So? Look at the terrain," Emily pointed out the window. "The map is old. The winter landslides changed the gradient. That ridge on the left isn't 300 meters away anymore. It's maybe 150, and it overhangs the road." Miller glanced at the map, then out the window. He paused. The geometry was tighter than the intel suggested. A textbook L-shaped ambush setup, if anyone was waiting for them. "Driver, speed up. Close the gap with lead," Miller ordered, his tone shifting from annoyance to professional alertness. "Gunners, eyes up. Watch the high ground." "You think the cook is onto something, Chief?" the driver asked, half joking. "I think the map is wrong," Miller grunted. "Better safe than sorry." Smith stopped leaning forward. "Get back in your seat." Emily settled back, gripping her M4 tighter. She checked the selector switch. Safe. Her finger hovered near the trigger guard, resting on the receiver. She looked up at the ridge she had pointed out. It was a mess of boulders and scrub brush. Perfect concealment. If I were up there, she thought, I'd put a spotter on the north spur and the shooter on the south. Crossfire. The convoy rumbled into the darkest part of the pass. The walls were so high now that the GPS signal on the dashboard flickered. "Viper 1 to TO radio check," Miller said. Static. "Viper 1 to TO, signal is weak. Do you read?" Hiss. The silence in the headset was heavy. The hum of the diesel engine seemed to get louder, amplifying the isolation. "Comms are down," Miller said, tapping the dash. "Satellite is blocked by the canyon walls. Standard ops for this sector, but I don't like it." Emily looked at Jenkins. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was scanning the cliffs, his jaw set. "Eyes on the road," Miller commanded. "Push through. We're in the blind spot." Emily watched the ridgeline passing by. For a split second, she thought she saw something unnatural. Not a person, but a shape. A straight line in a world of curves. A rifle barrel? A glint of optics? She opened her mouth to speak, to scream left side, but the doubt choked her. She was just a cook. Miller had told her not to clog the net. Maybe it was just a shadow. Then the world disintegrated. The sound arrived a fraction of a second after the shockwave. It wasn't a boom. It was a physical blow, a hammer of compressed air that slammed into the chassis of the Humvee and lifted the 3-ton vehicle onto 2 wheels. Emily's head snapped sideways, her helmet colliding with the ballistic glass. For a moment, gravity suspended. The world outside tilted violently, brown earth swapping places with the gray sky before the vehicle slammed back down with a bone-jarring crunch. Then came the noise, a deafening, tearing roar that drowned out all thought. "IED! Contact front! Contact front!" Miller was screaming, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Black smoke billowed past the window, thick and oily. The lead vehicle, Viper 2, was a burning husk 50 meters ahead. It had taken the main charge, its front axle obliterated, blocking the narrow pass completely. "Back up! Back up!" Miller yelled at the driver. "I can't. Transmission is dead. We're stuck." Whoosh! Crack! A rocket-propelled grenade streaked from the ridgeline, leaving a corkscrew trail of gray smoke. It missed their hood by inches and detonated against the canyon wall, showering the vehicle with razor-sharp shale. "Dismount! Dismount! Get out of the kill box!" Miller kicked his door open. "Jenkins, lay down, hate! Cover the exit!" Emily fumbled with the door handle, her fingers numb. The air inside the cab was already choking with dust and the acrid stench of cordite. She shoved the heavy armored door open and fell out onto the hard-packed dirt. The heat of the burning vehicle ahead hit her face like an open oven door. The valley was alive with gunfire. It echoed off the canyon walls, magnifying the sound until it felt like the mountain itself was screaming. Snap, hiss, pop. Bullets impacted the dirt around her, kicking up little geysers of dust. "Move to the rocks! 3 o'clock!" Jenkins roared, firing his M48 machine gun from the hip. The belt of ammunition danced and jingled as brass casings sprayed over Emily's prone form. She scrambled on her hands and knees, dragging her M4. Her training kicked in. Not the culinary school training, but the basic reaction drills she had drilled until her muscles burned. Low crawl, keep your head down, find cover. Ahead, near the burning wreckage of the lead truck, she saw movement. It was Petty Officer First Class Jansen, call sign Viper. He was the team's sniper, the man Miller relied on to be the eyes of God in these mountains. Jansen had stumbled out of the smoking turret, his face bloody, dragging a long tan rifle case. "Viper, get to cover!" Miller shouted, waving frantically from behind a cluster of boulders. Jansen looked up, dazed. He took a step toward them. From high up on the ridge, a hollow thump sounded. A mortar round. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was close enough. The round detonated 5 meters from Jansen. The blast wave crumpled him like a rag doll, throwing him violently against the jagged rocks at the edge of the road. "Jansen!" Emily screamed, the sound tearing from her throat before she could stop it. She watched, frozen for a microsecond that felt like an hour. Jansen didn't move. His body lay twisted in an unnatural angle, the tan rifle case resting just out of his reach. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The team's long-range capability was gone. "Don't look at him! Move, Smith!" Miller's hand grabbed the back of her plate carrier, yanking her behind a slab of fallen granite. She slammed her back against the rock, gasping for air. The dust coated her tongue, tasting of copper and unburnt fuel. Beside her, Jenkins was reloading, cursing steadily. "They have us bracketed!" Jenkins yelled, spitting dust. "Small arms from the east ridge, heavy machine gun from the north. I can't see the DSHK, but it's chewing us up." Miller pressed his radio handset to his ear, his face a mask of grim determination. "Viper 1 to TOC, taking heavy fire. Viper 2 is down, requesting immediate CAS." Damn it. He slammed the handset against his vest. "Dead air. We're shadowed." Emily hugged her knees. Her M4 clutched to her chest. Her hands were shaking. Not a tremor, but a violent vibration she couldn't control. She looked down at her uniform. There was a smear of blood on her sleeve. Not hers. It must have been from when she crawled through the dirt where another SEAL had been hit. "We need to suppress that ridge or they'll flank us," Miller barked, peeking over the rock and immediately ducking as a burst of heavy caliber rounds pulverized the stone inches from his head. "Where's the rest of the team?" "Pinned at the rear Vic," Jenkins replied. "We're split, Master Chief." Emily looked across the gap. Jansen's body lay about 20 meters away, exposed in the open ground. The rifle case was there, tantalizingly close, covered in dust. "The sniper," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "He's gone, Smith," Miller said harshly, checking his magazine. "Focus on staying alive. Keep your head down and your weapon ready. If anything comes over that berm, you shoot it. Do you understand?" "Yes, Master Chief," she said, but her eyes didn't leave the rifle case. The gunfire from the enemy was disciplined, single shots, well aimed, then bursts of heavy machine gun fire to keep heads down. They were being herded. The enemy knew exactly what they were doing. They had cut the head off the snake by taking out the lead vehicle, and now they were picking the team apart piece by piece. A round ricocheted off the ground near Emily's boot, sending a shard of rock into her shin. She didn't flinch. A strange clarity was beginning to seep through the panic. The wind was blowing the smoke from the burning Humvee across the road, creating a temporary screen between their position and Jansen's body. Smoke is cover, she thought. The wind is 5 miles per hour, left to right. She looked at Miller. He was busy trying to coordinate fire with Jenkins. They weren't looking at her. They weren't looking at the dead sniper. They were looking at the enemy they couldn't hit. Emily tightened her grip on her M4. She was just a cook. She was supposed to be cowering. But the geometry of the battlefield was screaming at her. If that heavy machine gun on the ridge wasn't silenced, they would all be dead in 5 minutes. And an M4 carbine couldn't reach it. She looked at the smoke. She looked at the rifle case. And for the first time since the explosion, she stopped shaking. The DSHK on the North Ridge found its rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was a slow, heavy cadence, distinct from the frantic cracking of AK-47s. Each 12.7 millimeter round struck the granite boulders protecting Miller and Jenkins with the force of a sledgehammer, sending razor-sharp spalling flying into the air. The rocks were disintegrating. It wasn't just suppression anymore. It was demolition. "They're chewing through!" Jenkins screamed, huddled low as a chunk of rock the size of a fist deflected off his helmet. "Master Chief, we need to displace. This position is cooked." "Displace to where?" Miller roared back, firing a short, controlled burst over the top of the rock before ducking back down. "Open ground to the rear. Cliffs to the right. We are pinned." Emily lay flat on her stomach, her face pressed into the dirt. The noise was a physical weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. She watched the smoke from the burning Humvee drift across the road. It was thick, oily black smoke, swirling in the wind. It was a wall, a temporary shifting wall. She looked at Miller. He was occupied with the radio, trying to raise the rear vehicle, his face a mask of frustration. He had forgotten about her. In his mind, she was a static object. Cargo to be protected, not a piece on the board. Emily didn't ask for permission. If she asked, he would say no. And if he said no, they would die. She unclipped her M4 from her sling and left it in the dirt. It was useless at this range. Dead weight that would only snag on the rocks. She needed to be light. She needed to be fast. As a gust of wind pushed the smoke directly between her and the enemy ridge, Emily moved. She didn't run. Running was suicide. She slithered, digging her elbows and knees into the sharp shale, keeping her profile lower than the scattered debris. She was a reptile moving through the ruin. "Smith, what the hell are you doing?" Miller's voice cut through the din, faint but furious. She ignored him. She was already in the gray. The smoke burned her eyes and throat, blinding her, but it blinded the gunner on the ridge too. She counted the seconds in her head, timing the DSHK's bursts. 5 rounds. Pause. Adjustment. 5 rounds. She crawled through the pause. Her hand struck something soft, wet. She had reached Viper. Petty Officer Johnson lay face down, his legs twisted. The air around him smelled of iron and raw meat. Emily felt bile rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down, forcing the cook part of her brain into a locked box. She wasn't seeing a person. She was seeing an objective. "Sorry, Viper," she whispered, the words lost in the roar of gunfire. "I need your tools." The tan Pelican rifle case was lying beneath his left arm. It was heavy, reinforced polymer. She grabbed the drag handle. It felt anchored to the earth. Thump, thump, thump. Bullets chewed up the ground 3 feet to her left. The gunner was spraying the smoke, searching for targets. Emily gritted her teeth and pulled. She didn't try to crawl back to Miller. Going back to the same position was a tactical error. It clustered the targets. Instead, she dragged the case toward a small depression in the rocks, about 10 meters to the right of the SEAL's position, a spot obscured by the fallen chassis of the burning truck. It was an agonizing 10 meters. Every inch was a struggle against friction and fear. Her uniform tore on the rocks, her knees bled, but she kept the case flat, moving only when the heavy gun paused. She rolled into the depression, gasping for air, her chest heaving. She was alone. Miller and Jenkins were to her left, drawing the enemy's fire. The enemy didn't know she was here. To them, she was just a shadow that had vanished into the smoke. She was a ghost. Trembling, she reached for the latches of the case. Click, click, click. She threw the lid open. There it was, the MK-14 Mod 5. It was a beautiful, lethal machine. The .300 Winchester Magnum bolt-action rifle sat nestled in the custom-cut foam, fitted with a Night Force scope and a suppressor. It was heavy, purposeful, and cold to the touch. Emily ran her hand over the stock. It felt different than her competition rifles back home. Scarier. Utilitarian. But the mechanics were the same. A bolt is a bolt. A trigger is a trigger. She looked at the dope card taped to the stock. Viper's handwriting. Elev. 3200 FT. Temp. High. She wasn't authorized to touch this. If she survived, she could be court-martialed for mishandling sensitive gear, for abandoning her position, for insubordination. She didn't care. She pulled the rifle from the foam, the weight of it settling into her shoulder like a missing limb returning home. She grabbed the 2 spare magazines from the case slots and jammed them into her cargo pockets. "Miller," she whispered to herself, peering through the gap in the rocks. "Buy me 10 seconds." She extended the bipod legs. The metal clicked softly. She wasn't CS2 Smith anymore. She was the only thing standing between Team 4 and a massacre. The MK-13 Mod 5 was not a rifle. It was a surgical instrument forged in steel and polymer. As Emily pulled it into her shoulder, the smell of the weapon, CLP oil and burnt powder residue, filled her senses, overriding the stench of the battlefield. She pressed her cheek against the stock. It was too high. Viper had a larger build, a thicker jaw. She couldn't get a proper sight picture. "Improvise," she told herself. She dug her elbows into the loose shale, shifting her body lower, contorting her spine to align her eye with the Nightforce optic. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. She reached for the scope's diopter ring, her fingers moving with a dexterity that had nothing to do with chopping vegetables. She twisted it. The blurry world of the ridgeline snapped into terrifyingly sharp focus. Through the glass, the chaos of the ambush transformed into a silent, terrifying, high-definition movie. The dust hung in the air like suspended gold dust. She could see the individual leaves on the scrub brush 700 meters away. She scanned left. Nothing. She scanned right. Movement. There. The DSHK position was well concealed, dug into a natural cave formation halfway up the cliff face. Through the scope, she saw what Miller couldn't. The gunner was a bearded man in a gray tunic, laughing as he adjusted the feed tray of the massive weapon. A loader was beside him, linking a fresh belt of ammunition, rounds the size of carrots that would punch through the Humvee's armor like paper. "Elevation," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She glanced at the dope card taped to the stock, then at the turrets. Viper had dialed in for a generic engagement distance, but the angle here was steep, at least 20 degrees up. Shooting uphill required gravity compensation. If she aimed dead on, the bullet would fly high. Range, 720 meters. Angle, 20 degrees. Wind, full value left to right. She did the math in her head. It was a language she hadn't spoken in 4 years, not since the day the Navy Medical Board reviewed her file. She remembered the sterile white room, the doctor tapping the X-ray of her reconstructed rotator cuff. "You're a liability in a combat role, Smith. The recoil will tear you apart. Culinary specialist is the only rate open to you. Take it or discharge." She had taken it. She had served eggs and scrubbed trays while her soul gathered dust. Emily reached for the elevation turret. Click, click, click. The sound was crisp. Mechanical precision in a world of noise. She dialed 4.2 mils up. Then the windage. Hold left edge of the target. Below her, Miller shouted, his voice cracking. "Jenkins, check your ammo. They're moving on the right flank." "I'm dry, Master Chief. Reloading." The DSHK gunner racked the charging handle of his heavy weapon. He swung the barrel down, aiming directly at the rock where Miller was crouching. He wasn't suppressing anymore. He was going for the kill. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. The cook was gone. The medical waiver was gone. There was only the shooter, the rifle, and the wind. She grabbed the bolt handle and lifted it. The action was smooth as glass. She pulled it back, stripping a .300 Winchester Magnum cartridge from the magazine, and pushed it forward. Clack chunk. The round was chambered. The weapon was live. She flicked the safety off. The pad of her index finger found the trigger. It was a 2-stage match trigger, light and crisp. She took up the slack, feeling the wall. Her shoulder throbbed, a phantom ache from the old injury, or perhaps a premonition of the recoil to come. The .300 Win Mag kicked like a mule. It might re-injure her. It might dislocate the joint. Let it break, she thought. Just make the shot. She exhaled, emptying her lungs until she hit the natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's chest. The world narrowed down to a single point of aim. "Miller," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. "Heads down." She squeezed. The recoil was instantaneous and violent. The buttstock of the MiG-13 slammed into Emily's injured shoulder, driving the polymer deep into the scar tissue of her old rotator cuff tear. A white-hot spike of pain shot down her arm, numbing her fingers, but her eyes never left the scope. Through the Night Force optic, the world bucked upward, then settled back down. She saw the trace, a distortion in the air, like a jet's contrail, spiraling toward the ridge. It was the bullet cutting through the atmosphere, fighting the wind she had calculated only by feel. The flight time at 700 meters was roughly 1 second. 1 second where she was God, and the man on the ridge was a ghost who didn't know he was dead yet. Impact. The DSHK gunner's chest erupted in a puff of gray dust and pink mist. He didn't scream. He simply folded backward, his hands flying off the spade grips of the heavy machine gun. He collapsed into the dirt, a crumpled heap of gray cloth. "Contact front! Sniper! Sniper!" Jenkins yelled from the rocks below, his voice cracking with panic. He was looking at the ridge, confused, thinking the shot had come from the enemy. "Check your background. I repeat, blue on blue. Check your background." Miller screamed over the net, his head swiveling wildly. The heavy machine gun had stopped firing. The sudden silence was louder than the noise had been. Emily ignored the pain in her shoulder. She racked the bolt. Up, back, forward, down. The empty brass casing spun out of the ejection port and landed in the dust with a cheerful ting. Through the scope, she saw movement. The loader, the man who had been feeding the belt, was staring at his dead partner. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then he lunged for the grips of the DSHK. He was going to fire. Emily keyed her radio, her thumb pressing the PTT switch on her chest rig. "Miller," she whispered. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, stripping away the rank, the protocol, the kitchen. "Wind is full value, left to right, 700 meters. "Smith?" Miller's voice was a ragged bark in her earpiece. He looked toward the burning Humvee, toward the smoke where she was supposed to be hiding. "Smith, get your head down. Stay in the truck. I have the solution. Don't move." "Smith, that is a direct order. Do not engage. You are a cook, for God's sake." The loader grabbed the charging handle of the heavy gun. He swung the barrel toward Miller's position. Emily didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission. She exhaled, finding the bottom of her breath. She held just off the loader's left shoulder, compensating for the wind that was whipping the smoke across her vision. Crack thump. The second shot tore through the valley. The loader's head snapped back. He dropped like a stone, falling over the body of the first gunner. The DSHK pointed uselessly at the sky. "Target down," she whispered into the comms. "Adjusting for second target. Don't thank me yet." "Jesus Christ," Jenkins breathed over the open channel. "Clear the net," Miller snapped, though the edge of authority in his voice was blunted by shock. He looked toward the pile of rocks where Emily was hidden. He couldn't see her. He could only see the barrel of the MiG-13 protruding slightly from the shadows, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the suppressor. Emily pulled her eye away from the scope for a fraction of a second to blink. She expected the nausea. She expected the shaking hands, the guilt, the horror of ending 2 lives in 10 seconds. It was what the psychiatrist had warned her about during her evaluation years ago, the dissociation. But she felt nothing. No sickness, no guilt, only a cold, mathematical satisfaction. The equation had been balanced. 2 threats removed. 2 friendlies saved. "Status," Miller demanded, getting back to the war. "Gun is down, Master Chief," Jenkins yelled, peeking over his cover. "The DSHK is unmanned." "Then move, bounding overwatch. Get to the secondary cover." "Smith!" Miller shouted the name like a question. "Smith, do you have eyes on the East Ridge?" Emily settled back into the stock, ignoring the throbbing ache in her shoulder that was now radiating into her neck. She adjusted the parallax knob. "I have eyes," she replied. "Visual on 3 tangos moving down the scree slope. They're trying to flank you, Master Chief. 600 meters. Can you hit them?" She looked at the small figures moving fast through the rocks. Hard targets. Moving targets. "I can slow them down," she said. "Then do it. Jenkins, on me. Move!" Miller and Jenkins broke cover, sprinting across the open ground toward a larger cluster of boulders. As they ran, Emily tracked the lead insurgent on the East Ridge. He stopped to raise his AK-47. She squeezed the trigger. The third shot didn't kill the target, but it shattered his nerve. The round impacted the shale inches from the lead flanker's boot, the supersonic crack arriving a split second later. The fighter scrambled back behind the ridgeline, dragging his comrade by the vest, their flanking maneuver broken before it began. Movement stopped on the east flank, Emily reported, her voice flat. She cycled the bolt again. Clack chunk. A fresh round slid home. Good copy, Miller's voice came through the earpiece, breathless but controlled. He and Jenkins had made it to the secondary cover, a depression formed by an ancient rock slide that offered better protection from the DSHK's previous angle. Smith, listen to me. They know where you are. You're kicking up dust every time you fire. You need to displace, now. Emily looked at the ground in front of her barrel. Miller was right. The aggressive muzzle brake on the Mk-13 vented gas sideways and down to reduce recoil, but in this bone-dry environment, it created a visible puff of dust with every trigger pull. A giant arrow pointing right at her head. Snap crack. A bullet struck the rock face a foot above her scope, showering her helmet with granite chips. The enemy rifleman on the lower slopes had found her range. Taking fire, she hissed, rolling onto her back and pulling the long rifle into her chest. Move, Smith. Left side. Get behind the engine block of the wreck, Miller commanded. This time she didn't argue. She scrambled backward, crab walking through the debris, dragging the heavy rifle by its scope mount, a sin in the sniper world, but a necessity in survival. The air around her was alive with the angry buzzing of incoming rounds. The enemy had shifted their focus. The SEALs were pinned, but the sniper was the threat they feared most. She reached the charred remains of the Humvee's engine block. The heat radiating from the twisted metal was intense, singing her eyebrows, but it was solid steel. She propped the rifle on the front tire, using the burning rubber as an expedient rest. Set, she gasped, wiping sweat and grit from her eyes. All right, I've got eyes on, Miller said. The shift in his tone was palpable. Gone was the condescending bark of the galley, the officer speaking to a subordinate. In its place was the crisp, professional cadence of a spotter talking to a shooter. He was no longer Master Chief Miller ordering a cook to peel potatoes. He was a team leader directing his deadliest asset. Reference the White Rock, 11 o'clock, 200 meters up the slope. RPG team setting up. Emily scanned. She found the White Rock. Visual. Send it. She didn't hesitate. She trusted his call. She exhaled, settled the crosshairs, and squeezed. Crack thump. Impact, Miller confirmed instantly. Target neutralized. Scan right. Tree line. Machine gunner moving to setup. Visual. Moving target. Lead him 2 mils. Wait. Send it. Crack thump. Hit. He's down. For the next 10 minutes, they fell into a deadly rhythm. Miller called the targets. Emily serviced them. The hierarchy of rank dissolved, replaced by the pure meritocracy of combat. The cook and the chief became a single weapon system, eyes and hands separated by 50 meters of kill zone. But the rifle was taking its toll. The 300 Win Mag was a punishing caliber. Emily's shoulder was throbbing with a dull, sickening ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Her vision was starting to tunnel. And worse, the rifle was getting lighter. She glanced at the magazine well. Empty. She reached into her cargo pocket for the first spare magazine. It was gone, lost during the crawl through the rocks. Panic flared, hot and sharp. She patted her other pocket. 1 magazine left. Miller, she said, her voice tight. I'm Winchester on the first mag. I have 1 spare. 5 rounds total. There was a pause on the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. Copy that, Miller replied, his voice grim. Make them count. We have QRF inbound, but they're 10 mics out. We need to hold the perimeter. 10 minutes is a lifetime, she muttered, stripping the empty mag and slamming the final one home. Contacts, the valley floor, Jenkins shouted, his machine gun opening up with a long, sustained burst. They're rushing us. 20 plus. Foot mobiles. Emily swung the scope down from the high ridges to the valley floor. Her heart stopped. A wave of fighters was breaking cover, sprinting directly toward the SEAL's position, using the folds in the ground for cover. They were abandoning tactics for brute force, a chaotic charge to overwhelm the small team before air support arrived. "Too many," Emily whispered. "Miller, they're closing fast. Danger close." "Engage the leaders," Miller yelled, opening fire with his own rifle. Jenkins joined in with the M48, the belt-fed weapon tearing into the advancing line. But the sheer volume of targets was overwhelming. Emily fired. 1. A fighter dropped. She cycled the bolt. She fired. 2. Another fell. She cycled the bolt. She fired. 3. She cycled the bolt. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber sooner than she expected. She had miscounted, or maybe she had started with less than a full mag. She looked at the ejection port. Empty. "I'm dry," she screamed. "Rifle is dry." The enemy was 70 meters away and closing. The heavy boom of the sniper rifle had kept them cautious, but the silence now emboldened them. They could hear the difference. They knew the big gun was out of the fight. "Switch to secondary," Miller ordered. Emily dropped the M13. It clattered against the rocks, a useless stick of precision engineering. She grabbed her M4 from the dirt where she had abandoned it earlier. It was covered in dust, the iron sights clogged. She raised it, flicking the selector to semi. Contact left. A fighter popped up over a boulder just 30 meters away, raising an RPG. Emily pulled the trigger. Click. A malfunction. Dust in the bolt carrier group. She stared at the weapon in her hands, then at the fighter leveling the rocket launcher at Miller's position. She had no ammo for the sniper rifle. She had a jammed carbine, and she was the only one with the angle to see the threat that was about to end them. The jam in the M4 was a double feed, a catastrophic failure requiring seconds to clear. Seconds she didn't have. The fighter with the RPG was 30 meters away, leveling the tube at Miller's position. He was screaming something, his finger tightening on the trigger. Emily dropped the useless carbine. Her right hand swept down to her thigh holster. It was a fluid, practiced motion, drilled into her not by the Navy, but by years of competition shooting before she ever wore a uniform. She drew the M9 Beretta, her thumb flicking the safety off as the weapon cleared leather. She didn't aim with the sights. She pointed with her body. At 30 meters, a 9mm pistol was a desperate tool, but desperation was all she had left. Pop, pop. 2 rounds struck the RPG gunner in the chest. He stumbled, the rocket launcher dipping toward the ground. His finger spasmed on the trigger. The rocket whooshed out, striking the dirt 5 feet in front of him, detonating in a spray of red mist and gravel. The explosion knocked Emily backward against the engine block. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Snap, whack. A high-velocity round slammed into the steel rim of the tire she was using for cover, inches from her face. Sparks showered her neck. "Sniper! High Ridge! 12 o'clock!" Miller screamed over the comms. "He's waiting for you to pop up." Emily pressed herself into the dirt. The RPG threat was gone, but the board had reset. The enemy sniper, the one who had killed Viper, was still up there, and he knew exactly where she was. He was waiting for the cook to make a mistake. She looked at the MK13 lying in the dust. The bolt was locked back, empty. "Smith, suppress him," Miller yelled. "I'm dry, Master Chief. I told you I'm dry," she shouted back, panic fraying the edges of her voice. She rolled onto her side, her eyes frantically scanning the open rifle case she had dragged behind the wreck. The custom-cut foam was empty. The mag slots were empty. Think, think. Her eyes landed on the bottom of the case, underneath the foam lining which had been torn loose during the drag. A glint of brass, a single loose 300 Win-Mag cartridge. It must have fallen out of a box during a previous loadout, forgotten and rolling around in the bottom of the plastic shell. 1 round. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and snatched the brass cartridge. It felt heavy and cold. The Goldilocks round. She grabbed the MK13. Keeping her head low, below the rim of the tire, she slid the single round directly into the chamber and pushed the bolt forward. Clack. She locked the handle down. "I have 1 round, Master Chief," she whispered, her breathing ragged. "Just 1. "Make it count," Miller replied. His voice was lower now, deadly serious. He's in a hide, deep in the rocks. I can't see him. If you miss, he'll pin us until the main force overruns us." Emily shifted her position. She couldn't peek. If she put her eye to the scope, he would put a bullet through it. He was watching the tire. He was watching the corner of the engine block. She needed him to shoot first. She needed him to break his discipline. She looked around. Debris littered the ground. A piece of the Humvee's door lay nearby, and next to it, her M4. She grabbed the carbine by the barrel. She unclipped her helmet, wincing as the strap chafed her sweaty chin. "Miller, watch for the flash," she said. "What are you doing?" Giving him something to shoot at. She placed her helmet on the muzzle of the jammed M4. It was a crude puppet, a classic trick that every sniper knew, but in the heat of battle, instinct often overrode training. She lay on her stomach, angling the Menk 13 around the left side of the tire, while she slowly raised the helmet on a stick above the right side of the engine block. She held her breath. She pushed the helmet up just enough to expose the crown, wiggling it slightly. 1 second, 2 seconds. Crack. The helmet was ripped from the rifle barrel, spinning away with a jagged hole through the Kevlar. "Got him!" Miller yelled. "Muzzle flash! 2 fingers left of the split rock. He's cycling." The enemy sniper had taken the bait. Now he had to work his bolt. He had maybe 2 seconds before he was back on scope. Emily didn't flinch. She swung her body out from cover, exposing herself to the kill zone. She settled the rifle on the tire. She found the split rock. She saw the dust settling from his muzzle brake. She saw the movement of a shadow resettling behind the stone. She didn't wait for a clear picture of his head. She aimed for the center of the shadow, calculating the penetration. The rock he was hiding behind was shale, brittle, sedimentary. The 300 Win mag was designed to turn cover into concealment. Wind is dead calm. She exhaled. The reticle settled. She squeezed the trigger. Boom! The rifle bucked violently. "Target!" Miller screamed. "Target down! You got him!" He slumped over the ledge. Emily didn't cheer. She watched through the scope as a rifle, a Dragon Unov SVD, tumbled from the high rocks and clattered down the cliff face. She slumped forward, resting her forehead against the hot scope ring. The chamber was empty. The pistol had 3 rounds left. The M4 was a club. "Good shot, Smith," Miller said, and for the first time, there was awe in his voice. Good shot. But the war wasn't over. The sound of shouting from the valley floor grew louder. The infantry wave she had stalled was regrouping. They knew the sniper was silent again. The click of the empty chamber on the Mk-13 echoed like a gavel stroke. The duel was won, but the war was lost. From the valley floor, the shouting intensified. It wasn't the tactical communication of a maneuvering force anymore. It was the guttural, rhythmic chanting of a mob that smelled blood. They had counted the shots. They knew the heavy gun was silent. They knew the SEALs were wounded and pinned. "They're coming!" Jenkins screamed from the lower rocks. "Full wave! Center! Left! Right! They're flooding the zone!" Miller was firing his sidearm, the pop, pop, pop of the pistol sounding pathetic against the roar of incoming AK fire. "Fix bayonets if you got 'em. Knives out. Prepare to repel boarders." Emily dropped the sniper rifle. It was just plastic and steel now, heavy and useless. She scrambled back to the engine block, grabbing her jammed M4. She yanked on the charging handle, kicking the stock with her boot, trying to force the double feed clear. It wouldn't budge. The brass casing was fused into the chamber, welded by heat and grit. She threw the carbine aside and drew her M9 Beretta. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She dropped the magazine to check the count. 3 rounds. 3 rounds against 30 men charging up a scree slope. She looked at Miller. The Master Chief was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his thigh. He had dropped his empty rifle and was holding a frag grenade. His last one. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the mask of command slipped. There was no orders left to give. There was only an apology in his eyes. "Get behind me." "Smith," Miller rasped, pulling the pin on the grenade. "When they crest that rise, I'm dropping this. Stay low. I'm not hiding, Master Chief, Emily said, her voice trembling, but her grip on the pistol firm. She crawled up beside him, resting her arms on the hot metal of the wreck. The enemy was 50 meters out, then 40. She could see their faces now. Young men, old men, their eyes wide with the frenzy of the kill. Dust kicked up around their feet as they sprinted, firing from the hip. Don't shoot yet, she told herself. Wait until you can't miss. Talk! This is Viper 1! Miller screamed into the handset, his voice cracking. Broken arrow! I repeat, broken arrow! We are being overrun. Request immediate fire on my pose. Burn it down. Static. Then a voice cut through the hiss, clear, calm, and angelic. Viper 1, this is Valkyrie 0 to 6. We have your beacon. We see you. Keep your heads down. Danger close. The ground began to vibrate. It wasn't the vibration of footsteps or explosions. It was a deep, thrumming resonance that rattled Emily's teeth. Down! Get down! Miller threw himself over Emily, covering her body with his heavy plate carrier. He didn't throw the grenade. He hurled it as far down the slope as he could and buried his face in the dirt. Emily curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. Brrrt! The 30mm M230 chain gun of an AH-64 Apache does not sound like a machine gun. It sounds like a zipper being pulled by a giant. The rounds, exploding with the force of hand grenades, impacted the slope 20 meters in front of their position. The earth erupted. Emily felt the shock waves pummeling her chest, squeezing the air out of her lungs. The noise was absolute, a wall of acoustic violence that drowned out the screams, the gunfire, and her own thoughts. Brrr! A second burst, longer this time, swept from left to right, sanitizing the kill zone. Then came the rockets. Whoosh crack, whoosh crack. Hydra 70s slammed into the ridges, obliterating the positions where the enemy riflemen had been suppressing them. The pressure wave lifted the dust and smoke, creating a sudden, eerie twilight. Then silence. Not the quiet of the kitchen, not the quiet of the wait, but the ringing, deafening silence of a battlefield that has been violently reset. Emily lay there gasping for air, the smell of burnt aviation fuel and pulverized rock stinging her nose. Miller was heavy on top of her. Master Chief, she whispered. Miller groaned and rolled off her, flopping onto his back. He was covered in gray dust, his face a mask of grime and sweat. He stared up at the sky. Above them, two dark silhouettes circled like birds of prey. The Apaches. They were low, their rotors chopping the air with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. They banked sharply, their sensors scanning for any movement, any heat signature that didn't belong to the friendlies. Valkyrie to Viper, the pilot's voice came over the speaker, sounding bored. Guns dry, rockets dry. You guys look like you had a rough morning. QRF ground element is 2 mics out. Sit tight. Miller let out a long, ragged breath. He turned his head to look at Emily. She was still clutching her M9 pistol, her knuckles white. Safety on, Smith, Miller said softly. Emily looked at the gun in her hand. She hadn't realized she was still aiming it at the ridgeline. She engaged the safety and holstered the weapon. Her hands started to shake then, violently, uncontrollably. The adrenaline dump had arrived. She looked down the slope. The charging wave of infantry was gone. There was nothing left but churned earth and silence. You okay? Miller asked. He wasn't checking her gear. He was looking her in the eye. I think I broke the souffle, Emily said, a hysterical giggle bubbling up in her throat. Miller stared at her for a second, then let out a short, barking laugh. Yeah, I think you did. He sat up, wincing as he moved his wounded leg. He looked at the MK-13 rifle lying in the dust, then back at the cook who had wielded it. Help me up, he said, extending a hand. It wasn't an order. It was a request. Emily holstered her fear, grabbed his forearm, and pulled. 3 days later, the galley at Fob Keystone smelled of bleach and rehydrated potatoes. The air was cool, filtered by the humming AC units. a stark contrast to the oven-like heat of the blind valley. Petty Officer Emily Smith stood at the stainless steel prep table. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Peel, chop, slide. She stopped. Her hand was trembling. Just a micro tremor, barely visible, but she felt it. She set the knife down and gripped the edge of the table, breathing through her nose. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The tactical breathing worked. The shaking stopped. She reached up and touched her right shoulder. Under the crisp fabric of her chef's whites, the skin was a canvas of purple and black deep tissue bruising. The Mech 13 Mod 5 had left its mark, a kiss from the recoil that felt like a permanent reminder of the violence she had unleashed. The serving hatch slid open. The noise made her flinch. Her hand darted toward her hip, reaching for a holster that wasn't there. She froze, forcing her muscles to relax, forcing the adrenaline back into its cage. "Easy, Smith." It was Master Chief Miller. He was in his garrison uniform, clean-shaven, his wounds bandaged and hidden beneath the camis. He wasn't wearing his helmet or his armor. He looked smaller without them, more human. He leaned against the frame of the hatch, watching her. "Master Chief," she said, her voice returning to the professional neutral tone of a subordinate. "Chow isn't for another 20 minutes. "I'm not here for chow," Miller said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the metal counter. Emily looked at it. It was a copy of the after-action report for the ambush in Sector 4. "Read it," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the paper. Her eyes scanned the official military jargon. Unit engaged by superior numbers, multiple causalities, designated marksman KIA. She stopped at the paragraph detailing the engagement of the enemy sniper and the DSK positions. Hostile heavy weapon and precision threat neutralized by Master Chief Miller and SO-1 Jenkins, utilizing organic weapon systems. CS2 Smith provided critical logistical support and medical aid during the engagement. Emily looked up. "You lied." "I corrected the record," Miller said softly. "If I put in that report that a culinary specialist picked up a classified weapon system, engaged targets at 800 meters without a spotter, and violated about 6 different articles of the UCMJ regarding unauthorized combat action, you wouldn't get a medal, Smith. You'd get a court-martial. They'd discharge you for being a liability and a cowboy." "So I did nothing," she said, tapping the paper. "According to this, I just handed out bandages. According to that, you're a good sailor who did her job." Miller leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But the guys know. I know." He reached into his pocket again. This time he pulled out something small and heavy. He placed it on the counter next to the paper. It was a single spent brass casing. 300 Winchester Magnum. "I found this in the truck bed when we got back," Miller said. "1 shot, 1 kill. That's not luck. That's a skill set." Emily stared at the casing. It was dull and dented, a piece of trash to anyone else. To her, it was the only proof that she existed. "What happens now, Master Chief?" "Now." Miller stood up straight. "Now you make dinner, and next time we go outside the wire, maybe I ask the XO to assign you as my RTO. Someone who knows how to read the wind might be useful on the radio." He tapped the counter twice, a sign of respect. "Keep the casing, Smith, but keep it hidden." Miller turned and walked away, his limp barely noticeable. Emily stood alone in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerators filled the silence. She picked up the brass casing, feeling the cold metal against her skin. She slipped it into her pocket, right next to the small, waterproof notebook she kept hidden. She picked up her knife. The onion on the cutting board was waiting. Chop, slide, chop, slide. The rhythm returned. The mask was back in place. To the Navy, to the world, and to history, she was just CS2 Emily Smith, the girl who made the eggs. But as she looked out the plexiglass window at the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush, she allowed herself a small, secret smile. She knew the wind was blowing 5 miles per hour, full value. And she knew that if she had to, she wouldn't miss. She wasn't just a cook. She was the ghost in the galley.